They came in silence, not with the hunger of a predator, but the greed of men. A sudden, violent crack split the air, shattering the fragile morning calm. The birds fell silent, the trees held their breath. The sound rolled through the forest, carried by the wind like a warning, like a scream. Kumba's head snapped toward the source of the sound. His nostrils flared. His breath was slow but sharp. He knew that sound. He had heard it before. But this time, it was different. This time, it was close. A second shot. Louder. Closer. Then a scream, high-pitched, desperate. A sound that did not belong to the trees or the rivers or the wind. It belonged to them, his family. And then, silence. The jungle, moments ago alive with sound, was now hollow, empty, as if the earth itself had stopped breathing. Kumba remained still, frozen in that endless moment between before and after, between peace and war. His ears rang, but he could still hear the faint echoes of what had just happened. His massive fists clenched, his breathing deepened, his muscles coiled. And in that moment, something inside Kumba broke. Kumba ran. The jungle blurred around him, the scent of blood thick in the air. Every step pounded against the earth, his massive fists slamming into the ground as he tore through the undergrowth, his ears strained for any sign of them, his family, his troop. But the only sound that remained was the echo of gunfire, fading into the wind. Then he saw them. The clearing, once their home, was now a graveyard of broken bodies and shattered silence. The trees stood tall, their branches stretching over the scene as if trying to shield the fallen. His family lay scattered, motionless, their dark fur matted with dirt and crimson. The young ones, gone. The mothers, lifeless. The elders, struck down where they had stood. And in the center, where he had stood only hours before as their protector, there was nothing but emptiness. A single, choked breath left his throat. His vision swam. His mind refused to believe what his eyes saw. But then, movement. A rustling beyond the trees. Voices. Low, guttural, human. Kumba's gaze snapped up. His eyes, once filled with warmth, now burned with something else. He took a slow step forward, his breath deep, controlled, the way it had been when he faced rival males, when he stood his ground to protect his troop. But this was different. This was not a battle for dominance. This was something far more dangerous. His hands curled into fists, his chest heaved, his heartbeat pounded in his ears. And then, as if the jungle itself had woken from its slumber, a deep, rumbling growl rose from within him. Low, guttural, filled with a promise of what was to come. The poachers had not killed the last silverback, but they had created something far worse. The jungle swallowed him whole. Kumba moved through the shadows, his massive frame silent despite his size. He was no longer just a silverback. He was something else now. Something forged in loss, sharpened by rage. The pain no longer slowed him. It fueled him. Every step he took carried the weight of his fallen family. Every breath was a reminder of what had been stolen. The poachers thought they had won. They thought they had erased him, like they had erased so many before. But they had not killed Kumba. They had only awakened something they could never control. He watched them from the trees, his amber eyes burning in the darkness. They were careless, laughing, sitting around their camp, rifles resting against their sides. They did not know the jungle like he did. They did not feel the weight of the earth shifting beneath them, warning of what was coming. They were prey now, though they didn't know it yet. Kumba learned. He watched. He waited. The humans had their weapons, their traps, their fire, but Kumba had something greater. He had the jungle, the towering trees that had sheltered his kind for centuries, the thick vines that twisted and curled like living things, the rivers that ran deep and silent, waiting to pull in anything that didn't belong. The jungle had been his home, but now it was his weapon. He was not alone. The leopard came first, drawn by the scent of death and the shift in the air. A predator that knew when the balance had been disturbed. It did not fear Kumba. It understood. Then came the hyenas, slinking through the undergrowth, laughing their broken, hungry laughter. The birds, too, watched from above, their cries sharp, warning of something unseen. Even the wind seemed to change, whispering through the leaves, waiting for the first move. And Kumba was ready. The poachers thought they had conquered the wild, but they did not realize. The wild had been watching. The first man never saw it coming. One moment he was reaching for his rifle, the next, he was gone, dragged into the shadows. A scream cut short. The others turned, their laughter vanishing, eyes wide with confusion. The jungle was still, too still. Then came the second. A rustling in the trees, a flash of movement, something huge, something fast, a blur of black and silver, a force so powerful it sent him crashing into the dirt before he even had time to cry out. The others scrambled, grabbing their guns, shouting orders, their voices shaking. But the jungle did not answer them. It belonged to him now. A trap snapped shut, but on nothing. A rifle fired, hitting only air. Kumba was everywhere and nowhere. He moved between the trees like a ghost, striking fast, vanishing just as quickly. The fear in their eyes grew. This was not an animal running for its life. This was something else, something hunting them. The campfire flickered wildly, casting long, shifting shadows across their terrified faces. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the darkness, vibrating through the earth. It was close. Too close. A man ran. He didn't get far. Kumba emerged from the shadows, massive, unstoppable, his eyes locked onto the last two standing. Their hands shook as they raised their rifles, but their weapons felt useless now. They had been the hunters. Now they were the hunted. The jungle watched. The trees whispered. The night belonged to the last Silverback. Only one remained. The leader of the poachers stood alone, his breath ragged, his hands trembling as he fumbled with his rifle. The others were gone, swallowed by the jungle, taken by something far greater than they had ever understood. His eyes darted through the darkness, searching for a way out, but there was none. The jungle was endless, and somewhere in the shadows, Kumba was waiting. A branch snapped behind him. He spun, raising his gun, but there was nothing there, just trees, just silence. Then, another sound, a low, deep rumble that shook the air around him. It was not thunder, it was not the wind, it was him. The leaves shifted, the fire flickered, and then Kumba stepped forward. He was a towering force, his silver-streaked back glistening under the moonlight. His breath was slow, measured, his dark eyes locked onto the man before him. There was no fear in them, no hesitation, only judgment, only rage. The poacher raised his rifle. His fingers trembled on the trigger. He had killed so many before. He had taken life without thought, without remorse. But now, standing before the last Silverback, he knew. He had never faced something like this. The rifle fired. The bullet tore through the night. But Kumba did not fall. The leader took a step back, his chest rising and falling in panicked gasps. His gun was empty. His power gone. Kumba moved forward. The man fell to his knees, his hands shaking. "It was just business," he whispered, his voice barely more than breath. His words meant nothing here, not to the trees, not to the earth, and not to Kumba. The Silverback loomed over him, his massive shadow swallowing the last of the firelight. For a moment, the jungle held its breath. And then, with one final deafening roar, Kumba made his choice. The jungle was silent once more. The fire had burned down to embers, flickering weakly in the darkness. The poachers were gone, some taken by the wild, others left to be remembered only by the trees. No one would come looking for them. No one would mourn them. Kumba stood at the edge of the clearing, his massive chest rising and falling, his breath slow and steady. His fists, stained with the past, hung at his sides. The rage that had consumed him now smoldered like the dying fire. The battle was over, but the scars would remain. He turned, stepping back into the shadows where the jungle closed around him like an old friend. This had always been his home. It had been his family's home. And now it was his to protect. Alone. But legends do not die. Whispers of the last silverback would spread, carried by the wind through the trees, spoken in hushed voices by those who dared enter his domain. Some would say they had seen him, a ghost in the mist, watching from the treetops, his golden eyes glowing in the darkness. Others would hear the distant echo of a roar, a warning that the jungle had not forgotten. And far away, hidden in the safety of the deep forest, a young gorilla watched from the shadows, his small chest rising and falling with the same steady breath. He was the last of them now, but he was not alone. The jungle would remember. The earth would remember. And so would Kumba.